Oh, stop it. Come on, there's nobody here at this time." With those words, the man and woman, naked in a bath in broad daylight, were laughing and flirting. The idiot grinning there is, unfortunately, my husband. I usually wouldn't be home at this time, but due to unforeseen circumstances, I ended up witnessing this scene. I was so shocked that I couldn't speak, and their voices echoed unpleasantly in my head. Amidst this, they started talking about me. "Hey, does your wife know we're having fun, drinking and bathing together like this during the day? That voice sounds familiar." Holding my breath, I quietly peeked through the window. She's too clueless to ever know or figure it out. You're right. Haha. I felt anger welling up in my chest. They had no idea that I, the wife, was watching them from the garden. They think they can get away with this during the day. You're the idiot. I had the urge to call out them playfully flirting in front of me right then and there. But I didn't. Because tomorrow. My name is Sarah, just an ordinary working housewife. I married David a few years ago. We met at a bar. I was having drinks with my coworkers when David and his group, who were sitting nearby, said, "Would you like to join us for a drink?" When I was sober, I would never entertain such a pickup attempt. But that day, after a busy work period had ended, I was tipsy and in a good mood. So, I decided to accept the invitation. Drinking with David and his friends turned out to be surprisingly fun, and since they weren't making any moves that night, I got a good impression of him. We exchanged contact information and continued to meet up for drinks. Eventually, he confessed during one of our outings, and we started dating. In hindsight, it might have been a strategy, but he seemed sincere, so I didn't mind. And now, being married and living happily proves it was the right choice. David works as a sales rep at a major IT company, and he seems busier than me every day. Thanks to that, he earns a good salary. As a dual-income couple without kids, we have more financial flexibility compared to our peers, and we have no worries about our future. But turning points, for better or worse, come unexpectedly. One day, I had taken a day off during the week to compensate for working a weekend shift. After seeing David off to work, I was catching up on housework, but something had been bothering me lately. David's face had been noticeably gloomy. When I asked if he was okay, he would just say yeah or uh-huh. Even if I tried to pry, if it was a work problem, there wasn't much I could do but listen. Being in a technical field, I couldn't understand the intricacies of sales, social interactions, or quotas. As I was pondering this, I suddenly heard the front door open. It was still morning, who could be entering the house unannounced? I thought with concern, but then David appeared in the living room. You scared me. I thought it was an intruder. What's going on? Did you forget something? No, I quit. David still had that gloomy look on his face as he answered. His sudden words left me confused, not understanding what David was saying. But as I replayed, I quit in my head, I started to get an idea of what he meant. Quit, you mean you quit your job? David quietly nodded yes. David, who always said, work is fulfilling and going well, suddenly quit his job. What happened? I didn't know what to say, but I knew not to blame him given his expression and mood. What happened? David slowly began to explain. But his explanations were all about his state. I'm tired, my mind feels foggy and I don't want to do anything, I don't want to see anyone. Without any specific reasons. After he seemed to have finished talking, David suddenly fell silent and only gave brief responses. I'd never seen David like this before. Well, his quitting doesn't mean we'd be in trouble tomorrow. For now, his health is the priority. Thinking that, I somewhat forcefully took David to the hospital the next day, even though he didn't want to do anything. The diagnosis at the hospital revealed that David had mild to moderate depression. It was likely due to the stress from his busy work schedule. While the severity varied, I had anticipated this kind of mental state and diagnosis. The doctor we saw wasn't the type to rely on medication for everything. He suggested, for now, take plenty of rest and, when possible, engage in some exercise like walking. Let's monitor your condition for a while. Although I wasn't sure if this was the best approach, if rest and exercise could help, it was worth a try. But from that day on, David just stayed in bed, showing no intention of exercising. In hindsight, David was never much into exercise. Someone in such a state of depression, lacking the energy to do anything, wouldn't even go for a walk, let alone actively do anything. Still, I couldn't just leave David like that, so one day I asked him, if walking is too hard, why not do something else you enjoy? Aren't there hobbies you couldn't do because of work? Reading, games, movies? I'll help if needed. David, with a vacant look, muttered, yeah. And then said something unexpected. I've always wanted to go to the countryside. Somewhere no one knows me. Start over there. It was an unexpected answer. If he had just wanted a trip to a place with lots of greenery, we could go as soon as tomorrow. But starting over means, I always dreamed of living surrounded by greenery, like at my grandparents' house. I wanted to fulfill David's dreams and wishes, but I couldn't agree to it immediately, no matter how much I wanted to. So, I had no choice but to say, yeah, maybe in the future. But after that, David often said, I could get better in the countryside. Hearing that repeatedly made me depressed. I'd heard that depression can affect family members, and maybe this was it. If things continued like this, we'd both fall apart. Maybe I should seriously consider David's wish to live in the countryside. From that day, I started researching rural relocations. Then, I found a nice rural village about a 2 to 3 hour drive from the city. David could still see his doctor, and I wouldn't have to quit my job. So I made up my mind. Hey, David, if you're okay with this place, we could start our country life pretty soon. What do you think? I said this as I showed David the computer screen displaying information about a rural village. David's eyes widened, and he stared at the screen intently. Then, for the first time in what felt like ages, he gave me a smile. And so, we quickly began the process. We took out a loan to buy an old house in the countryside and started packing up our current home. The new house was a traditional style home, complete with a bath that required firewood. We would need to be careful, as one misstep could result in severe burns. The interior was well maintained and didn't feel too outdated, which is why I decided to buy it. David, seemingly a bit more energized by the move, was actively packing. Seeing David a bit more lively, I felt reassured that this decision might not have been a mistake. I followed the moving truck with my car and arrived in front of our new house. Even David couldn't hide his excitement this time. And so, our country life began. As the movers brought in our belongings, the local villagers watched us from a distance, curious about the new arrivals. I went around to introduce myself to the neighbors. Even though they were neighbors, the houses were spaced far apart, making each visit a bit of a walk. Just going around to the few people who had come out took quite a bit of effort. But everyone seemed kind, offering words like welcome and a good job. Some even said things like, take some cabbage from my garden, or feel free to ask if you need anything. It's rare to find such kindness in the city, especially from people who don't even know us yet. At this rate, we might be able to make it in this village. That's what I began to hope. However, that hope was short-lived. We hadn't fully grasped what it meant to join a closed, tightly knit rural community. About 2 weeks later, I began to feel that something was off. The villagers avoided making eye contact with me. I leave early for work, driving 2 hours one way from the village. Even at that early hour, the older villagers are up and about, tending to their gardens and fields. For the first few days after we moved in, they would smile and greet me, but lately, they wouldn't even look at me. Some even ignored me outright. Then, there was the incident with a drunk elderly man. One day, when I returned home early from work, I went to a supermarket on the edge of the village. It's a place the villagers frequently visit, and I often see the same people there. While shopping, I felt someone touch my butt. I turned around to find a drunk older man behind me. Some of the older folks living in the countryside are out of touch with modern social norms and still think this kind of behavior is acceptable. Previously, when a different person did something similar, I said, "Please stop," and an elderly woman nearby told me, "Just let him touch you." However, since what's unpleasant is unpleasant, I decided to stand up for myself in the supermarket as well, saying, "That's not okay." The man then said something shocking. "Come on, it's no big deal." I heard you're a top-notch prostitute. You're really good at it. Why don't you service me next time? What was he talking about? I'm just an ordinary office worker, and I've never worked in such a trade, not now, not ever. That's not true. Who told you that? Everyone in the village is saying it. Confused, I asked for more details. The man, perhaps because he was drunk, started to spill everything. It started because David never left the house. While I was at work, a villager had come by to share some wild vegetables from the mountain. But David, staying inside all day, never answered the door. This happened a few times, and rumors about us began to spread among the villagers. There's no way a woman would work while her husband stays at home, they said. It started with people thinking that I was a gangster's woman and that David was hiding because he got involved with them. As a result, the rumors evolved, suggesting that David rarely left the house because of this. Now, the story had morphed into me being a prostitute and having eloped with David. What a nightmare. Sure, it was rude of David to ignore the villagers' kindness. But we moved to the countryside because we found social interactions challenging. I thought I could get along well with the villagers, but it wasn't that simple. Because of these rumors, David and I were constantly subjected to hostile stares from the neighbors. And I increasingly found myself the target of leering looks. Give me a break. I never experienced anything like this in the city. I repeatedly tried to explain that the rumors were completely baseless, but the villagers didn't care about what was true or false. What mattered was how much they could gossip and chat. We had become the main topic of their conversations. Thus, I found myself fleeing to work every day, suppressing my reluctance to return home, and repeating this routine. Feeling the strain of country living, starting to regret our move, and feeling like I was on the verge of losing my mind. Something remarkable happened. Someone reached out to help us. Her name was Susan, a woman about 20 years older than me. Susan lived about a kilometer away from us with her husband and daughter. She had also moved to the countryside over 10 years ago and had faced similar rumors and treatment from the villagers. I heard the rumors and was worried. Even if it's all lies, being gossiped about in such a closed-off community is tough, isn't it? I understand how you feel, Susan said. She visited my house to check on us. Meeting someone who could be called an ally for the first time since moving to the village brought me such relief that I cried and shared our entire story with Susan. I see. From now on, if you need anything, no matter how small, just let me know. Even if it's just that you can't keep up with the housework. The rumors don't last so long, so let's work through this together. Thus, I met the first trustworthy person in the village. Susan was very considerate of our situation and would check on David when I was at work. Sometimes, she would bring her daughter, Rachel, to help with the garden, which I had been neglecting. Rachel, 3 years younger than me, was home for summer break from college and was incredibly reliable. Despite being younger, her experience in the village made her very dependable. I couldn't be more grateful for everything Susan and Rachel did for us, especially teaching me how to chop firewood. Having a bath at home was great, but I couldn't properly prepare the firewood, so we always ended up just using the shower, wasting its potential. On weekends, Susan's family would visit us, or we would go to their house. Over coffee, we shared stories and deepened our friendship. Gradually, the rumors subsided. Although we still faced occasional unpleasant comments, they no longer affected us as much. This was all thanks to Susan. Finally, it felt like the ideal country life we had hoped for was beginning. About a month later, it was the company's anniversary, so I had the day off even though it was a weekday, and I spent the day cleaning the house. Moving to the countryside hadn't significantly changed cooking or laundry routines. Since the number of people hadn't increased, that was to be expected. However, cleaning was a different story. When we lived in the city, our apartment wasn't very large, so cleaning didn't take much time. However, now that we were in a house with much more space and 2 floors, cleaning had become a significant task. Susan had said, "I'll help anytime," but I felt I should be able to clean my own house, so I tried not to rely on her. This reminded me of a similar situation. It was, of course, the day David came home in the morning after quitting his job. In just a few months, our lives had changed dramatically. Yet, it wasn't all bad, as David had started smiling more lately. I wanted to believe that moving to the countryside was the right decision. As I was cleaning the bathroom, I noticed a strand of hair that caught my attention. David has a typical short haircut, and I have a bob cut. However, the hair in the bathroom was clearly longer than either of ours. It was probably long enough to reach someone's back. I remembered that Susan usually tied her hair up, but it could be this length when let down. Perhaps she had visited and cleaned the bathroom while I was away. If that was the case, I needed to thank her again. Thinking that, I decided not to dwell on it too much that day. However, the long hairs continued to appear in the bathroom. If they had been found elsewhere, given how often Susan visited, it wouldn't have been as concerning, but in the bathroom, it felt strange. Finding someone else's hair in our bathroom repeatedly started to feel eerie, so I decided to casually ask Susan about it the next time we met. "Susan, have you ever seen our bathroom?" Susan looked puzzled by my sudden question. Maybe it wasn't the best way to ask. However, she didn't seem particularly unsettled and answered my question calmly. "I've seen it from a distance but never been inside. I know your bath is with wood fire." "I've heard of wood-fired baths, but that's unique. Why do you ask?" Taken aback by her question, I stammered, "Well, if you'd like, you can try it sometime," giving a rather nonsensical response. But from her demeanor, I could tell she wasn't lying. So, whose hair was it then? Could it be that the bath had some sort of history or haunting? The thought sent a chill down my spine, and I decided to get to the bottom of the hair mystery by asking David directly. His response was unexpected. "Hair? I don't know. Isn't it yours?" He was clearly flustered. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and he avoided making eye contact with me. It was then that I realized I had been avoiding an obvious possibility. The possibility that David might be cheating. Normally, finding the hair should have made me ask David first. He's home most of the time, so he should know. But I didn't want to think about that, so I took the long way around. Still, I had to confront him directly. "Come on, you must know. How could long hair get in the house if you're here all day? Are you saying there's a ghost? That's ridiculous. If it were a haunting, there'd be more hair, not just a few strands." Despite my pressing, David kept saying, "I don't know. I have no idea, and maybe there are ghosts like that," avoiding the truth. Eventually, he said, "Do you want to make my mental state worse?" using his illness as a shield. Frustrated, I snapped, "Fine," and retreated to my room. For a while, I continued to suspect David of cheating, but I couldn't obtain definitive proof. Since I confronted him, David seemed to be more cautious, and the mysterious hair stopped appearing in the bathroom. In a way, this was an admission of his infidelity. However, it was still circumstantial evidence and not concrete proof. Despite his obvious distress and the regular appearance of the hair, I found myself unable to take decisive action. Which was incredibly frustrating. I still had to work, despite my worries. One day, driving from the village to the city as usual, I went to work and followed my normal routine. Then, during my lunch break, I went out to buy some food. "Excuse me, are you Sarah?" A woman I didn't know called out to me. I turned around to see that the woman had a noticeably swollen belly and was clearly pregnant. She told me, "I have something to talk about," so we headed to a cafe near my office. Her name was Emily. At first, I thought it was a scam or solicitation and considered brushing her off. Knowing my name was strange, but since I wore an ID badge at work, it wasn't that unusual. However, Emily knew more than just my name. "I need to talk to you about David." Here's what Emily told me. Emily was a junior colleague from David's previous job and had been involved with him. One day, they had an accident during intercourse. My eyes went to her stomach. So that's what this was about. I felt a wave of nausea from the anger. But Emily continued, ignoring my distress. She told David, "If I get pregnant, I want to keep the baby." For David, she was just a fling. A baby would risk exposing the affair to me. The evidence of David's affair was now in the form of an unborn child. Fearing this, David had reportedly told Emily, "Absolutely not. If that happens, I'll give you money to get an abortion." However, Emily never told David whether she was pregnant, and time passed. Meanwhile, David, gripped by fear that his affair might result in a child and that rumors about his relationship with Emily were spreading at work, began to suffer mentally. What a fitting consequence for his actions. Ultimately, this led to him quitting his job, moving to the countryside, and our current situation. I'm not asking you to leave David. I just want him to acknowledge the child. It's sad for a child to grow up without a father. Driven by this desire, she had hired a private investigator to find David. Upon discovering his whereabouts and learning that I still commuted to the city, she decided to approach me first. I had a splitting headache. While I was pondering who David's current mistress might be, an old affair resurfaced. Not only that, but she was claiming to be pregnant with David's child. I, who didn't even have children with David. Needing time to sort out my thoughts, I exchanged contact information with Emily and told my office I was feeling unwell before leaving early. I needed to talk to David immediately. As I arrived home and got out of the car, I felt a sense of unease. Steam was coming from the bathroom window. It wasn't unusual for someone to take a bath in the afternoon, but this seemed off. I approached the bathroom from the garden and listened. I could hear David and a woman talking. Does your wife know we're enjoying the bath, drinking, and having fun like this in the afternoon? The voice sounded familiar. I peered through the window. If she knew, we wouldn't be having fun together like this every day, David said. He and the woman next to him laughed together, unaware that I was watching from the garden. I couldn't believe he was cheating with her. I wanted to confront David and his mistress, who were having fun right in front of me. However, I was so shocked that I couldn't even make a sound. I just hid outside the bathroom, hugging my knees and crying silently. Where did I go wrong in my life choices? I quickly dismissed that thought. No, it wasn't my mistake. David was clearly at fault. I wouldn't forgive him. I decided that I wouldn't let him get away with this easily. From that day, I began to prepare. The next day, I secretly called Susan and made a request. I need you to promise not to tell anyone, not even your family. Can you promise me that? I asked seriously. Susan nodded. I understand. David is having an affair, and I plan to set a trap for him. I need your help to make sure he can't escape. Susan was surprised, but after a moment of thought, she agreed. All right, let's do this thoroughly. On the day of the plan, I lied to David, saying, I am going to work, and drove out of the village. I parked my car in a lot and got into Susan's car, heading to the nearest station. We picked up someone and returned near the house, waiting until the expected time of the affair. When steam started rising from the bathroom, we made our move. I sneaked into the house and collected all the clothes David and his mistress had taken off. Next, I threw the clothes into the roaring fire as fuel. After burning all the clothes, I continued to add more wood to keep the fire blazing. Suddenly, there was a loud splash and screams from the bathroom. Ouch! It's burning. This is bad. I'm going to get burned. It's so hot. His mistress urged, hurry, get out. Let me explain how to use a wood-fired bath. The bottom of the bath is a metal cauldron heated directly by fire. The water gets warm, but the metal bottom becomes too hot for a person to step on. So, a wooden plank, called a bottom board, is placed to protect the feet from burns. I had tampered with that bottom board. I had once split it cleanly in half and then reattached it with glue that weakened with heat. As the bathwater temperature rose, the glue's bond weakened, and the board split apart again. As a result, David and his mistress stepped onto the scorching metal bottom, causing them to leap out of the bath in a panic. But when they rushed out to the dressing area, their clothes were gone, and Susan was waiting for them. I hoped it wasn't true, but you really were David's mistress, weren't you, Rachel? Susan said. Rachel, now standing naked before her mother and exposed for her affair, had to face reality. Why? Mom. No, no, no. Rachel screamed. David, next to her, tried to explain, this isn't what it looks like, but his efforts were soon halted. A woman appeared in front of him. David, I'm pregnant with your child. You'll acknowledge it, right? Emily said. Seeing Emily appear in front of him, David panicked and exclaimed, "Why are you here?" When asked why she was there, it was because Susan and I had picked her up at the nearest station. All for this confrontation. I arrived shortly after and confronted David. "I know everything about the past affair and the current one. Why should I care for someone who cheats and then claims to be mentally ill? Why should I support such a jerk? I moved to the countryside, waking up at 4 a.m. every day for work because of you. I've had enough. What do you think my life is worth? I'm divorcing you." David, trying to defend himself, said, "You've got it wrong. And my mental illness is real, but I didn't care. Why should I care about the illness of someone who betrayed me?" As David tried to make excuses to me, his former mistress, Emily, pressed him, "You'll acknowledge the child and pay child support, right?" Meanwhile, his current mistress, Rachel, was being scolded by Susan. "How could you do this?" David lashed out, "I'm not acknowledging anything. Get an abortion." Rachel cried and tried to shift the blame. "I didn't think you were such a person. Mom, he forced himself on me." Hearing this, both Emily and Susan's anger flared again, creating chaos. Aftermath. A few days after the chaos, David and I successfully divorced, and I demanded compensation for the infidelity from David, Rachel, and Emily. Emily accepted my demand and then sought acknowledgement and child support from David. The affair between David and Rachel quickly spread through the village, leading to their ostracism. In such a closed and old-fashioned community, this outcome was inevitable. The only person I felt sorry for in this whole ordeal was Susan. She had extended a helping hand when I was struggling in the village, and I felt like I had repaid her kindness with betrayal. I apologized to her later, but she said, "I'm the one who should apologize. Sarah, you did nothing wrong. No matter the circumstances, those who cheat and their partners are at fault. My daughter did a terrible thing," she said. Since denying this wouldn't change the fact that Rachel had an affair with David, I accepted her apology. After my divorce from David, I had no interest in country life, so I gave him the house along with the mortgage and returned to the city. I don't know how David, now jobless and ostracized, will pay off the mortgage, but he can live with whoever he wants, be it Emily or Rachel. It's no longer my concern.